This is my ADS-B scope, my real fake radar. I got this idea a while back when I found this 5FP7 tube on eBay. Initially, I'd only displayed vector graphics on it by using the audio output of a Raspberry Pi, but the original goal of building this XY scope was to make it into a mock radar scope using live ADS-B data and a GPS. Currently, it doesn't have a GPS connected to it yet. Instead, the program I wrote gathers and averages the data from about 100 aircraft in the area, or about 100 aircraft XY latitude-longitude points. With that, it gives a rough location of where you are within about 5 miles, but also centers the scope onto an area with the most receivable aircraft activity. Sometimes it takes a while to gather that many aircraft locations, but in the area I live in, it usually only takes about 10 to 20 seconds. The way it works is that it uses a Raspberry Pi with an RTL-SDR radio connected to it with an appropriately tuned antenna for 1.09 GHz or 1090 MHz. From there, it uses an open source program called Dump 1090 to decode the ADS-B messages into raw text. I pipe this data into a program I wrote called ADS-B Sweeper. This program stores the ADS-B address, its locations, headings, and velocity data into a database where it can be further processed. Then another thread calculates a radar scope trace, compares it against the database, and generates intensity data to be streamed out with the trace data into two SPI DACs with a 10 MHz clock. Each DAC has 2 channels. All in all, the Raspberry Pi is just fast enough to get a sweep at this speed, with 1024 by 1024 resolution and 360 steps of rotation. Linux is not a real-time OS, and getting this to work this smoothly has been a real challenge. The flickering you see is not the trace speed, it's a problem with my 80-volt circuit. I'm using a neon bulb as a crude regulator and the bulb is beginning to flicker because it was cheap. So I will have to come up with another solution for that. As for the display usage, I have a problem with the deflection amplifier's power supply. I kind of just threw that circuit together and it doesn't work efficiently enough for me to get enough voltage to the amplifier to get the deflection I want without clipping. I plan on rebuilding this power supply and maybe even the entire amplifier in the future. In my opinion though, it's better to buy a pre-made XY scope if you plan on building a similar project. If you could do this on a modern digital scope as long as it has the digital phosphor or equivalent option. I plan to post my code on my GitHub soon. I don't really have any schematics at the moment as I've built this project mostly for my head. But I might go ahead and make schematics in the future, at least for the tube's power supply section. Anyways, that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as I have. I guess I should also mention that the afterglow in the trace shows up a lot brighter on the camera. There's the Raspberry Pi, and its connector is going to those two DACs in the center of the screen. There's the deflection amplifier and power supply. That's the tube power supply. Homemade flyback transformer in the back. The RTL-SDR on the side, covered in copper for extra shielding.